Moreover, it should be taken into account that respect of the principles of bioethics in national policy since the last decade of 20th century has been promoted and determined by a number of international acts. Guten Morgen, sehr geehrte Frauen und Herren, distinguished audience. I would like to speak about human being. Humanists and later Enlightenment philosophers foregrounded the human being as the measure of all values and the point of reference. Democracy and a state governed by the rule of law, a state that we recognize as being compatible with the contemporary world, were formed based on value of human dignity. A human being's dignity, first and foremost, needs to be legally protected from the state arbitrariness. Simultaneously, with the consolidation of the concept of humanism to shape the new society and a state that would conform to it, two fundamental questions gained relevance. Who is human being? And how a human being may be treated? In the course of a couple of centuries, in circle of subjects that were recognized as being human beings, persons endowed with human dignity and equal in the fullness of their rights, significantly changed. In the circle of equals was constantly expanded in the course of 19th and 20th centuries, including women, persons of diverse ethnic origins, etc. And gradually, the multicultural civic society was formed with the principle of equality, prohibition of discrimination. However, by answering the question that has raised, who is human being, by all persons are human beings, we don't gain a comprehensive notion of the nature of a human being and the limits of the state's discretion in adopting decisions that affect a person. The question regarding the scope of the state's duties vis-à-vis a human being is equally important. In last centuries, unraveled the legal limits that restricted a person's right by changing the penal policy, the nature of the institution of family, introducing the administrative procedure, providing the possibility to a person to turn against the state. Now we have to construct together new limits between the discretion and responsibility of a person itself and a state, within which society could live sustainably. Science, released from the restrictions set by religion, offered the possibility to free society from the descendants of such individuals who might jeopardize the future welfare of the rest of the society. Only the consolidation of a rule of law and fundamental rights put an end to these terrible social experiments made in the beginning first half of 20th century, which disproportionately restricted some individuals' rights to self-determination over one's body. Although implementation of scientific findings in the society is strictly limited by fundamental human rights, instead of narrowing persons' possibilities, science currently is expanding them, for example, to improve intellectual abilities, to treat the incurable or at least to prolong their lives by such manipulations that were not available before, by using the bodies of other human beings to obtain spare parts, by offering to infertile family the possibility to get a child of their own who is carried by a surrogate mother, etc. To develop medicine needs research and experiments. Therefore, in the 1970s, the practice of creating human embryos in a test tube was extensively developed, to use them not only for overcoming infertility, but also for scientific research, in which society is interested since many of its members want to be more clever, young, healthy, or perhaps even immortal. Therefore, a part of society pretended not seeing experiments with animals, human ova, embryos, since these, after all, were not experiments with human beings. This way successively arrived to the need of defining a human being which enters the scope of right protection as well as what kind of treatment of a human being is admissible. Legal answers to these questions cannot be found without the discourse of values and ethics. Since the second half of the 20th century, to deal with the new ethical problems that were first of all raised by medical practitioners, representatives of various areas of science presented their own opinion regarding those limits that should be set in the treatment of human beings. Religion contributes significantly to the discourse on human values. First of all, the Christian religion, since the rapid scientific development started in the Christian cultural space. However, at the same time, also medical practitioners, nature scientists, lawyers, researchers of criminal law, human rights, medical law joined the discussions, leading to extensive interdisciplinary debate. In assessing the possible risks of harming which the development of science could cause to nature, the concept of bioethics was introduced in 1970 by the American biochemist Potter to denote the survival science in the ecological field. However, soon afterwards, André Hellegers applied the term of bioethics to the science of medicine to create a branch of professional ethics to limit the threats that the science of medicine could cause for the human being. Presently, we can note that bioethics had become one of the most relevant lines of applied ethics. Several groups of issues can be selected that are also relevant to bioethics. First of all, philosophers and scientists ask what is natural and what is unnatural. This question, for example, frames the discussions on stem cell therapy, xenotransplantation, or grafting of animal and plant cells into the human body. Lawyers could frame it as follows: what kind of manipulations with the human body don't infringe upon human dignity? Second, likewise involved debates about life, death, and killing. In the regard, it is important to clarify what a human life is worth inter alia, what are the state's obligations in promoting the life expectancy of each person in ensuring quality of life. Moreover, since medicine offers extensively possibilities to keep a person with serious injuries alive, the question of when death occurs has become relevant. One of the answers is that a person is dead with the establishment of brain death. However, this answer doesn't provide full clarity as to how long a patient in a coma should be cared for. This issue has already for 10 years been considered by the courts, since relatives are not always able to come to an agreement. Moreover, society, for example, has to decide whether allowing to die by discontinuing expensive medical care should be regarded as killing. Third, another range of questions is linked to the protection of a person's identity and the right to self-determination. This is closely related to a person's right to decide about himself, also in the course of medical care. However, other issues related to the development of human personality enter the scope of this topic, like genetic intervention in fetal development or questions regarding transplantation of other person's organ and blood transfusion. For example, the religious conviction of Jehovah's Witnesses strictly rejects these possibilities. Moreover, I would like to examine the question of euthanasia, not in the context of death, but rather in the context of protecting a person's identity and self-determination, since primarily it is question of whether a person has the right to decide if and when she or he should die. Fourth, and the most interesting, the commercialization of a human body is another significant ethical problem that characterizes contemporary society. It is important to clarify whether the following comply with human dignity. For instance, the fact that a live donor is economically forced to sell his organ to gain means of substance, or that the organs of a dead body are sold at auction, or parents' right to buy a baby from test tube, whether the parents are consumers and the consumer rights apply to them if the child turns out to be defective one. Lisa Bellantoni, the researcher of contemporary ethics, finds that two different trends of bioethics had developed. First, one represents the cult of life. Everything that happens naturally is good. The downside of this back to nature cult is rejecting scientific achievements that are accepted and used for generations, in result jeopardizing the security and welfare of person and society, or even a person's life and health. Currently, as a manifestation of the cult of life, parents' refusal to vaccinate their children and choosing only homeopathic methods of treatment could be mentioned, causing various epidemics which in certain circumstances can jeopardize our society. Second, cult of law. It's my. In turn, basically deals with the matters of how to legally resolve matters related to bioethic by providing encouragement for allowing or restricting further development of particular scientific research, for implementing of scientific achievements, etc. To achieve the desired outcomes, stakeholders or some individual apply pressure on the legislator by using petitions, demonstrations, or even eco-terrorism. For example, to decrease global warming, the legislator is required to restrict emissions by prohibiting certain types on engines and fuel. Namely, international treaties and laws are used to restrict economic development in order to safeguard environment by living responsibly. Or to decrease the risk of obesity in children and raise a healthy young generation, the principles of catering in schools, preschools, and orphanages are reviewed. As a result of this, children at orphan ages may be denied the birthday cake since its ingredients don't meet the standard of healthy nutrition. Many of the supporters of the cult of law are active in political parties and they directly influence the legislators' activity. The state may not stay outside these processes since traditionally the state protects the values that are most important for the society and regulates moral norms within the legal system. This introducing mandatory nature and predictability in the processes of public importance. It is the legislator who, as the decision-making body of the nation, in the name of collective will, has the obligation to adopt political decisions on all relevant matters. The legislator decisions that are not adopted today under the influence of rapid scientific development may be overdue tomorrow. New political concepts have entered the range of national politics alongside economic, social, international policy, among other Thanato policy or the policy of death, which denotes the policy of the state in matters that pertain to process of dying, abortion, euthanasia. The second new line in the national policy in the context of bioethics is the line of protecting human life and the life quality, pertaining to the policy of healthcare, occupational medicine, demographic policy, environment, protection, etc. It's important to note that the development of contemporary science and bioethics has led to the definition of new principles based on the concept of human dignity. For example, the principle of patient's autonomy. In accordance with the principle of patient's autonomy, each capable patient has the right to be actively involved in taking decisions regarding methods and means that are used in the treatment, and he is ensured not only the right to receive medical care, but also the right to refuse it, even if the refusal could cause damage of his health or even life. Science offers to introduce significant changes into the lives of society. Therefore, the whole legal system needs to be reviewed to regulate the relationships provided by the new scientific possibilities. At the same time, both the legislator and those applying legal norms must respect the principles of bioethics, of which I would like to mention as following the most important ones. First, in deciding on any issue, social values, first and foremost, human dignity must be taken into account. Second, the principle of awareness, of moral responsibility, deciding truly and fairly. Third, physical life is a value, whereas health is a value that is subordinated to and follows from life. And fourth, principle of subsidiarity. In examining a benefit to a person, it must be balanced with the interests of society. Moreover, it should be taken into account that respect of the principles of bioethics in national policy since the last decade of 20th century has been promoted and determined by a number of international acts. For example, the Council of European Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine of 1997, UNESCO Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights 1997, International Declaration on Human Genetics Data 2003, UNESCO Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights adopted 2005, contributed significantly to the unification of the principles of bioethics. It addresses ethical issues related to medicine, life science, and associated technologies as applied to human beings, taking into account their social, legal, and environmental dimensions. This, it can be concluded that over the last 50 years, 3 dimensions have evolved in bioethics: the dimension of applied ethics, national law, and international law. First and foremost, restrict uncontrolled scientific experiments with human beings to promote the protection of a person's human rights. Thank you.